Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for coming out this evening. The very fact that you're here, we know that all of you are very passionate about what we're going to discuss tonight. I'm not going to take up the floor for any more than is necessary at the moment. I would like to first introduce you to Seamus, who's the chairman of the board of Tullydonnell, after which we're going to talk, Anne-Marie is going to talk to you. Then we'll hear from parents, their stories. A lot of these stories are very, very positive. It's very clear that where early intervention has happened, it has had a huge effect on both the children and the families themselves. So we'll hear an awful lot of positivity during the course of the night. But we'll also hear about the challenges that are faced by the parents and the children themselves on a daily, monthly, yearly basis, and the struggles and fights that they've had to do to get what is, for parents who don't have children with ASD, a basic access to education, and just things we take for granted, they have to fight day by day. After which, we're very blessed that Damien, a clinical psychologist, has come down to talk to you tonight from Dublin. And then it'll be followed by Paul Savage, the principal of St. Joe's Secondary School, and he'll talk about the progression. So when the kids, his concerns for what will happen when these kids don't get the necessary help that they absolutely need in the foundation years, which is primary education. After which we'll come back to Anne-Marie, she'll sum up, and then we'd really love to hear your thoughts, hear your questions, and any other contributions you'd like to make. So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Seamus.
Thank you, Paula. My function here tonight is very simple. It's to welcome you all and to thank you for taking time out of your busy days to come and show your support for this very important issue. I'd like to particularly thank our invited guests and speakers for again making time to come and share their wisdom and their knowledge with us. And hopefully out of this meeting tonight, we'll begin to build up some momentum behind this very important issue. So thank you for coming, and I'll now hand you straight over to Anne-Marie. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. As usual, it was lastminute.com and I haven't got a speech prepared or something prepared, so I'm just going to speak from the heart. I'm really thrilled to see so many people coming out tonight. And I suppose our tickets filled up very quickly, our places filled up very quickly, and there was a lot of people who had to be refused coming tonight, which is indicative of the interest in this area and the need for a conversation around this area also. Now, I suppose I came to this position a number of years ago when I suppose my dad had Parkinson's disease, and I got an interest in the area of the brain and in neuroscience. And I studied for 2 years in King's College in London, the neuroscience and psychology of mental health. And around the same time that I was studying that, I got an interest in ASD, in autism. And almost as if it was, you know, supposed to be a little boy in our school, Eli. Do you want to come up, Eli? This is Eli. Eli was going through the process. Eli was going through the process of assessment and got a diagnosis of ASD. And I wanted to know how to help Eli because I didn't know enough about autism. I had heard about it, but I'd never seen it, and I didn't know anything, and I wasn't trained to. So I needed to upskill and find out what was the best thing to do and how was the best way. And you know what, we learned together, didn't we, Eli? Yeah. We learned together. We did a bit of research together, and we found out a lot about autism. And I suppose what happened then, I thought, well, you know, a lot of my research was around early intervention and getting in, as they always say, you know, prevention is better than cure. And to get in early and to, you know, recognise something early and to identify and then to use strategies to help is what early intervention is all about. And so we opened our first class in Tullydonnell in early intervention. And I was blown away, actually, because the theory was there. I learned everything about it, but to actually see it in action was just mind-blowing. It was mind-blowing to see what could be done. And I suppose the neuroscience behind it is that the brain in the early years is malleable. So, you know, it's susceptible to trauma, but it's also susceptible to work being done as well to improve the prognosis and to improve the outcome. And so I got really passionate about this area, and I thought, wow, this is a gift, actually. We can change lives by doing this. And over the years, we opened a second class and a third class and a fourth class in Tullydonnell. And I have to say, and I have to say this from my heart, I have the best team in Tullydonnell that any principal could work with. The passion, the dedication, the love for the children, and we love our children in Tullydonnell. And I suppose what's brought me here today and tonight is disappointment in a system and a feeling of a need to fight. A feeling of a need to fight for our children. And, you know, I suppose when you've got knowledge, you can say, right, I've got knowledge on this. We have to be careful not to make mistakes. And there's been lots of mistakes made in the past. Lots of mistakes made in the past in systems, in schools. But you know what, I will always say, well, look, the knowledge wasn't there. People didn't know. We know today. We know that intervention, early intervention, education, strategies help. We have seen it in action. We have seen it work. This year, this has come to my attention, and this is why I've brought everybody here tonight. Because this year, I had 2 children in our early intervention classes who were such success stories. And the decision was that they wanted to stay in Tullydonnell and progress into their mainstream class. It was amazing. And we all celebrated, the whole school community, everybody, every single teacher in the school celebrated the success of these children. And then I asked questions, and I said, right, well, obviously they're going to need support because, you know, they still have a diagnosis of ASD. The report hasn't changed, the diagnosis hasn't changed, and we're in the early days. They're still only little babies heading into junior infants. They need some support. They'll need support for a few years. So I was told then I had to go through an exceptional review process, and this I found strange because with opening the early intervention classes or opening an ASD class, you'll automatically get a teacher and 2 SNAs to support the child with the diagnosis of ASD. And so, because I thought, well, had these 2 little children, and is it okay if I mentioned their names? Yeah? So, Shay and Jamie, I thought, well, you know, had mum and dad decided that they were going to send them to an ASD class, they would automatically have got the resources. So I didn't think there was going to be any problem at all about getting the resources for them to integrate into mainstream. In fact, policy says integration and inclusion. Integration and inclusion. So I thought there'd be no problem. This is department policy. Of course, they will celebrate like us. They will celebrate that these children have had the success and have made it into mainstream. And the CNO came out from NCSE. So NCSE is the National Council for Special Education. And the CNO is the person who allocates the resources. And the CNO came out, and she came to the class, and we had all our paperwork done. I had all my homework done. I had all the reports done out. I had every piece of paperwork that could possibly have been needed to illustrate the needs of the children. Early intervention had given reports. Speech and language therapists, OTs had given reports to back up, yes, these children, we applaud their success, but they still need support to integrate into mainstream. And I was doing a little bit of work in Drogheda, and an email came in, and I opened it up and I thought, oh great, the CNO, that's great now, because I had been standing in for an SNA in the meantime in the classroom until we had got our SNA. And I thought, that's great now, I can get back to managing the school and I won't be trying to double job. And on the email it said, no, we decline, no extra support. We already had enough in the school. I actually sat in the car for 10 minutes and I didn't know whether to cry. I didn't know what to do. I actually was shocked. I couldn't believe it. And I came back to school and I came in, and one of the teachers, I was speaking to her in the staff room, and she said to me the following day, she said, Anne-Marie, I knew there was something wrong with you. I actually couldn't even articulate that the support wasn't being given. And I think it was the shock that it wasn't seen to be necessary. But it was also, it felt really like the people who were, you know, advocating a policy of integration and inclusion weren't supporting it. So these children had come so far, and then it came to the point where they were integrating in, as the policy suggests, and it wasn't supported. It wasn't supported. And this is why I am so upset about this, because my worry is that children and parents are going to choose to go to an ASD school-going class because the resources will be there. And the chances for their reaching their potential are capped. In the DSM-5, as Damien will know a lot more about it than I do, one of the criteria for getting a diagnosis of ASD is the social interaction and the difficulty around that. If we're looking at early intervention, if we're looking at early exposure to social interaction, to social situations, we need to be looking at early integration early, not later. We need to be supporting our children through this. There will be children, and an ASD school-going class will be more suitable for them. But it's not for every child, and the choice needs to be made with the parents. The parents must have the choice. At the moment, they don't have a choice. Now, these parents are going to tell their story of how it has affected each one of them. Janice, her son is in early intervention in Tullydonald at the moment. Charlie, beautiful little boy. And these children are so bright. They have so much to offer the world. And we have to be really careful around what we see and what there is, what the reality is. These children have so much to offer the world. We need to allow them the opportunity to reach their potential. That opportunity has not been given at the moment, and I'm not prepared to take it. I'm not going to look back in years to come and say that we were a neglectful society, that damage was done, that we have a whole cohort of children who could have reached their potential but weren't allowed to because the supports weren't put in place where they should have been. Lisa's going to tell her story about Jamie, who was one of the children who transitioned into mainstream, and Emmett as well with Shay. And then we have Helen, whose little boy Eli was diagnosed in mainstream, and Molly May, his sister, also. And they're going to say a few words, aren't you, later for us? Yeah. And then we have Roisin, and Roisin's going to tell the story of how her daughter Caitlin, the resources had to be taken from Caitlin in order for us to be able to support the little children who moved in junior infants, who couldn't have done without it. So this story affects everybody, and it affects every school, and it will affect every school. We have 24 children in Tullydonald who will be looking to go back, and the idea is they will go back to their own communities. And I see some of our principals here. I see Anne Phillips, and I see Aidan Rafferty, and I see Padraig, and I see Ambrose, and thank you so much for coming out. Have I missed anybody? Thank you so much for coming out tonight. These children will be coming to you, looking for places in mainstream. This is going to affect you too, in your schools. This is something that needs to be done. So I'm going to hand you over now. I'll finish up with what we're hoping to do at the end and how we're hoping to proceed forward with this. But I'm going to hand you over now to Janice, and we'll take it from there. Thank you for listening.
Good evening, everyone. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Janice and my little boy is Charlie. Sorry. Charlie is 5 years old. He has autism and he attends the early intervention unit in Tullydollen. Charlie was diagnosed privately last June, a process which we felt we had to do in order to gain access to services that otherwise wouldn't have been available to Charlie while he was undiagnosed. The waiting list to be diagnosed we just felt was way too long. When Charlie was about a year old, we began to see a difference in him compared to his 3 older siblings. It took Charlie longer to engage with us. He didn't look at us when we spoke to him. He didn't want to play with us. His smiles became harder and harder to gain. And as a parent, this is absolutely heartbreaking to watch your child not greet you with a smile, and it's extremely difficult to watch him not interact with his siblings or any other family members or friends within your family. Charlie basically didn't conform with the normalities of children of his own age. I suppose from my point of view, the reason why I'm here is because of the latest difficulties we face on top of our many challenges that we have in the decision whether to send Charlie to a mainstream school or whether to send him to a school with an ASD unit. Now, I know you might think, I've just said he's autistic and he should probably just go to the ASD unit. But as Anne-Marie said, not all children, autistic children or children on the spectrum, will require this unit. Some are perfectly fine to attend a mainstream, but yes, they will absolutely require help of an SNA. And I suppose from my point of view, and looking at the challenges it takes to get an SNA at this point, why would I send Charlie to a mainstream school? He automatically gets 2 SNAs in a unit. His classes are smaller. He has to do the undivided attention, I suppose, of them 3 people. But why shouldn't he have that option? Why shouldn't I be able to say, well, you know what, Charlie is able to go to mainstream. Yes, he requires help, and no, he doesn't need to go into a smaller class where it will be harder to integrate him into the bigger school earlier on in his life or later on in his life. But as far as I can see, the option to put him into mainstream comes with an extreme amount of worry. This is a will he, won't he worry. Will he have an SNA? Will he be able for it? It's also another worry that's already on a long list of worries that we have with Charlie on a day-to-day basis. Now, don't think that Charlie will automatically get a place in an ASD unit, because he doesn't. I've already have several rejection emails from schools with the ASD unit saying no, their place for the academic year of 22-23 are full. It's that in itself is very heartbreaking. So from this, then it begins another battle for us with copious amount of emails and forms to be filled in, sent to schools and CNOs, etc., trying to find a school first and foremostly that I feel is suitable for my child, but ultimately that's going to end up being available for him. That's pretty much why I'm here in a nutshell. Just to give him I want him to have the same option to attend a mainstream school without the worry of won't he have an SNA. It's the same option I had as a parent when I sat down with the 3 other children, to decide which school we were going to send him. I don't see, just because Charlie has a diagnosis of autism, why that should change. Why should I have to sit back and go, well, actually, I can't send him there because there's no place, or society says that he's better off in an ASD unit? Because, yes, at the time, he might be, but on a very, very, very bigger level, he might also be able to attend the mainstream, and that's it. It's the option for me, the option for myself and Kevin to say Charlie can go to mainstream with his brothers, or Charlie can go into another school with a better setting for him, that it just doesn't automatically have to mean it's an ASD unit, which doesn't automatically guarantee him a place anyway. So that's pretty much my story, because I'm the incoming, he's a Wren, he's incoming looking for a place in a primary setting. But I suppose for myself, just before I go, there was a little quote, if I can get it out without the tears and everything that goes with it. I read a book. Most special needs parents here will have read books. We'll have read forums. We'll have Googled for endless of hours. We'd have lost all them hours trying to find the resources and the information that we require to help our children. But I found a beautiful quote. It was written by a lady who writes for the Financial Times. She was reviewing the book I was reading. And she said, "We should all remember, In every autistic child, however cut off and distant they may outwardly seem, there resides a warm, beating heart. It's the same heart we all have in this room. It's the same heart all our children have. And just because he's different and he's autistic and he has a diagnosis or a disability or however else you want to put it, it doesn't mean he doesn't deserve the same options that, you know, the other children have, or who, you know, who's gone before him. And also, I suppose I wanted to share this as well, because we find this is a big thing in our house and we say it all the time. It's another quote, sorry. Charlie is a Mac in a PC world. He operates exactly the same, he's just programmed differently. Thank you very much for coming out. Thank you for your time. Thank you for listening, and it is all truly appreciated. Thank you.
Seamus or Emma?
Hi everyone. I suppose last time I stood up in front of people, this was a wedding, so it's slightly different. I'm just going to tell you my son's story. Shay's 5, he's 6 next week, actually next month. He started, there was no real issues to Shay, we couldn't see any difference. The first year of his life, he was just ticking along nice. He's 2 older sisters who mollycoddled him every step of the way, looked after him. So any kind of delay in walking or talking, we put down to his 2 sisters really. Had a few words when he was coming around 1, but then he just stopped talking or stopped engaging. His little sister was born when Shay was just 2. And his little sister Rhea, she's Down syndrome, so when she was born she was quite ill and she was in ICU for a while. So not saying we lost track of Shay, but we kind of were concentrating on Rhea and minding her, I suppose. Around that time, he was in the local creche, and the owner just said, look, maybe Shay should be, you know, he's not completing tasks as we thought he might, or he's not joining in as we thought he might, so, you know, maybe he should get checked out. So we were already in touch with the disability services because of Rhea, and they suggested speech and language therapy. So off we went and we started that. We thought that Shay was deaf, actually, so we had his ears checked out, his hearing checked out, it was fine. And then we were just sitting in a restaurant, the whole lot of us, and the lady who owns the restaurant came up and she said she recognised the way Shay was, you know, the hands and all that kind of stuff, and she said, was Shay diagnosed? And we went, what do you mean? Like, she goes, no, is he diagnosed? And he says, she just caught us in the hop, and she said, look, try this place in Swords. It's called Achieve Therapy. It's a great place, a really, really good place, but there's, like everything, there's waiting lists and all that kind of stuff. So we got on the waiting list and off we went. Renee was up and down to looking like a yo-yo with Shay, and but you could see the improvements. You could see you were getting little tricks how to communicate, how to engage with Shay. So he was coming along, and then the lady who ran the show, she said, look, maybe you should attend. There's night classes here for parents of kids with autism, and we were kind of, why would we go to that? But anyway, we went along, and she pulled us aside after one of the meetings, and she said, you know, Shay's all the signs of autism, and really you have to get him diagnosed and get him assessed. So that was another bad night or whatever. So off we went and we had him diagnosed, and it was March last year, just at the beginning of the lockdown, just when everyone was in great form, and we were at home, and the Zoom call with the psychiatrist, and over the Zoom she told us, this, Shay's autistic, and you get a big long report and you read all about your son, and that's not nice, right? But that's it, right? That's the scenario. Move forward. Immediately on to Bonding Disability Services, Liam and his team, and they're great. They're absolutely brilliant. They're under-resourced, but they're brilliant, and they're so caring and so helpful. And they put us on to Anne-Marie Ford. You know, I knew Anne-Marie, or I knew of Anne-Marie through my sister Kira and Sarah. So off we went, and Riverside. Anyway, Anne-Marie was like a breath of fresh air. I have a place for that fella in this school. We'll bring him in. And this was March, and so we were jumping around the garden, and off he went in September. And you want to see him getting into the bus with Olive and Nicholas every morning with his little bag, and not a bother, jumping into the bus. Off he went. Not a goodbye to us or anything, not so much as a goodbye or a thank you or anything, but off he went. And came home, and the lunchbox would be, and there wouldn't be a screw, not a crumb in it. But we used to get these little notes every day from the girls, Ellen and the team in there, and we just shade on this, shade on that, shade on this. He was playing with this fella, playing with that fella. Jamie was palling around with Jamie the whole time, so it was wonderful, it was class, like, it was just what you want to see. So the changing moment for us, we were sitting in the house, and my sister was home from London, and we were having dinner, and next thing is Shay just jumped on the table beside us. And you have kids with autism, you know, that's just like, you just start laughing and joking at all the jokes. We just thought this was brilliant. Because a year previous we had a party in the house for my sister, and he just didn't want anything to do with it. He was telling everyone to go home, but this day it was a full year later, and the difference was unbelievable. So Etcha too flew by, it absolutely flew by. He loved it. Even with the break of COVID, we were thought he might have to start again in the break in school. He didn't, just loved it. And back he went, but Anne-Marie says, right, it's coming to the end of the year, what's the crack next year? And we'd love to keep him. If she said it once, she said it 50,000 times, but she'd love to keep him, But she gave 3 options: special education school, maybe like St. Edith's, a school with an ASD unit, or Tullydonald, or would help. So she assured us he'd be well able for mainstream with SNA help. So that's what we went for. We were delighted. And the whole summer was set out for us. We knew what was happening. It was brilliant. And you know, you just need direction with the kids and all. So he started in junior infants, and he really just settled in. It was like a duck to water. I dropped him in the first day, because the year before we weren't allowed with COVID. I dropped him in, and all the kids going, hi Shay, all that kind of stuff. And he was there, and he just started interacting with his mates, and it was just to watch. It was unbelievable. And Anne-Marie was telling you there a few minutes ago, like when she got the phone call to see them refusing to help. Well, she rang me later on to say that she was his SNA, and I went, oh, go on, that's brilliant. She had a pay cut or something, right? And she says, no, they're after fucking refusing, and she doesn't, of course, I do, but she says, they're after cutting his, I have to step in there for a while for Shay. And I said, geez, that's not on, that is just not on. And she spoke about lack of empathy. Well, I won't mention names, but I rang that scene, and I said, what's the story? And she says, oh, and I said, do you realise Anne-Marie stepping in as the SNA? And I said, how's that going to work? And she called Anne-Marie a right hero. And I said, look, that's just pure rude. So we're here today to ensure that he started a journey. Shay started this journey. He was so quiet. He's just coming out of himself so much. It's unbelievable. And I just fear that next year he's going into senior infants, or maybe then first class and second class. And if you take away all the support that's built up from him, and just like a domino, it'll just all fall down again, and you'll be pulling the rug from underneath him. And that's just wrong. And it's not just wrong for Shay, it's wrong for Caitlin, because Caitlin had her SNA is helping Shay instead of Caitlin. That's not fair. I'll just say, they say that the happiest days of your life are your school days. And I just want to make sure my son can experience that, and any other child with autism or anxiety can just enjoy their school. And let's have this resources there and give them the best chance they can have. So that's all I want to say, I suppose.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Lisa. I am the mother to twin boys, Jamie and Killian, who have a diagnosis of autism. It is with great regret that I stand up here tonight. Over the past 4 years, my boys have been attending early intervention services for their diagnosis of autism. I myself have attended numerous courses to support my boys and enable them to reach their full potential. They have made huge progress over the past 2 years and have gone from being non-verbal to fully verbal and to very loving and social boys. I have done everything in my power to support my boys attending mainstream school. I have reports from their psychologists, OTs, speech and language therapists, all of which have noted their progress and recommend their ability to attend mainstream junior infants with the support of an SNA, which brought me so much delight. It was with great disappointment when I got a phone call from Mrs. Ford in the school to let me know that the extra support applied to our boys transitioned into mainstream had not been granted. I couldn't understand it because if Killian and Jamie had gone to an ASD class, they would automatically have had SNA support. It didn't make sense because the reports remained the same, the recommendations remained the same. The boys love school and learning. They come home every day telling me a new phonics sound and a new Irish word. They have integrated so well, and I know I have made the right decision to send them to mainstream, where they're playing with their classmates and learning and reaching their full potential. Every child should have that choice. It is very difficult, though, for me to see my children progress and know that it is at the expense of other children because SNA support has been taken from one child to give to another. I cannot understand how an SNA has not been sanctioned, giving all their support and documents and recommendations. They have a right to thrive in education, as does every single child, and having an SNA would support their ability to thrive. Thank you.
Hello everybody, my name is Helen and I have 2 children, Eli and Molly May over there with autism in mainstream in Tullydonnell. Eli is 11 and Molly May is 8. Eli was around 6, when I suspected that he was autistic. I applied for an assessment through primary care and I was told it would take around 12 to 18 months. 1 year later, when Eli was 7, he started to notice that something wasn't quite right, and he asked me to take him to a brain doctor. I told Eli that he was on a waiting list, and hopefully he would get an appointment soon. Eli asked me almost every day if he had gotten an appointment yet. I explained to Eli that there was a lot of children waiting to see the brain doctor, but as you can imagine, he was 7. So it was very difficult to understand why it was taking so long. After many phone calls, messages, emails, Eli was finally assessed 2.5 years after I had first applied. I will never forget the relief in his whole body when they gave him his diagnosis. He told me after that he knew it was autism. I had never suggested autism to him, but he just knew. My daughter, Molly May, was 7 when she told me she thought she was autistic after a series of meltdowns. I thought it was just learned behaviour, but assured her we would find out. So I took her for an assessment of needs. I fairly quickly realised that Molly May was spot on with her self-diagnosis, but was told that there was going to be a wait of around 4 years for an assessment. And I couldn't make her wait that long. So I had to borrow €1,100 to pay for an assessment, which confirmed what Molly May already knew. She is autistic too. They told me that she was expertly masking autism with very high levels of anxiety. Anne-Marie and all the staff at Tullydonnell have bent over backwards to support and acknowledge my children's needs. They have empowered them by accepting and embracing their differences while helping them to understand their diagnosis. Anne-Marie has taught us so much about what happens in the brain with autism, and it's fascinating. Words could never express how grateful I am that Eli and Molly May ended up in Anne-Marie's care. She is such an amazing advocate for all vulnerable children. By providing movement breaks and support for my children, she greatly reduced their anxiety, making it easier to settle them at night, easier to sleep through the night, reduce their meltdowns. Movement breaks help them to process things, to talk or think about their feelings, to regulate their emotions and calm their senses. Confusion is a major trigger for both of my children, so new concepts and ideas can be extra challenging for them. Movement breaks can help to calm their fight, flight, or freeze mode when they are overwhelmed or overstimulated. When Eli and Molly May were getting regular movement breaks, they would come out of school smiling and talking about their day. But most days without movement breaks, they would come out of school looking exhausted and drained and can be very quiet for some time. I've definitely noticed this more often since movement breaks were stopped. Molly May has said when she doesn't get movement breaks, she feels like her legs don't work for ages when she goes outside. Eli has told me that he feels that maybe he doesn't need them as much as he used to because he got them in the first place. My biggest fear is that without movement breaks, my children will regress. All their hard work to self-regulate will be wasted, and their mental health will suffer as a result. This is not right. This is not acceptable to allow vulnerable children who have worked and continue to work so hard to fit into a busy school environment to be neglected and overlooked. Eli and Molly May love school. They love learning and socialising. They really respect their teachers and their peers, but their sensory challenges can make it exhausting trying to conform and mask their autism. If we don't act now, more and more vulnerable children will continue to suffer and be forced to mask and internalise their feelings and anxieties, which will have a detrimental effect on the mental health of our children. We can't let that happen. We just can't. It's time for change. Thank you.
After many months of tests and her seeing many different doctors, Caitlin was diagnosed with epilepsy. She went through different types of medication doses to find out what specific dose worked for her. But she still suffered from seizures and cluster seizures, which could last for hours. Caitlin's doctors ran tests on her and realised that she had a rare genetic disorder and a rare condition called Landau-Kleffner syndrome, which is a sudden or gradual development of aphasia, the ability to understand or express language. And she also had an abnormal EEG. Caitlin can understand most of what is going on and what is being told to her and what is being asked of her, but she has difficulty in expressing and saying what she needs to say. As part of the Landau-Kleffner syndrome, it is difficult for her to express what she is trying to say. When Caitlin started school, she came on leaps and bounds with the help of an SNA. Caitlin can process what is asked of her, but with the Landau-Kleffner syndrome, she would need the help of an SNA to express what she needs to say back or to help get her point across. When Caitlin was 5 years old, on Mother's Day, she got very sick and delirious. She was rushed to A&E hospital in Drogheda. The doctors on duty could not understand why she was so sick, and they thought Caitlin was close to dying. The staff told us that we would have to say goodbye to our little girl. Thankfully, a doctor from Temple Street Hospital was working there that night and asked if he could run a few exploratory tests on Caitlin. After a few tests, they found out Caitlin's bowel had twisted and was in fact killing her, and if she didn't get operated on that night, she would die. Caitlin was then rushed to Temple Street Hospital. That night in Temple Street Hospital, they cut Caitlin open, took out her inner organs. They realised she had damaged tissue on her stomach and bowel, and therefore they untwisted her stomach, removed her appendix, put her stomach and intestines back in and sewed her up. Caitlin was then in ICU for over 2 weeks in a coma, and it was still touch and go, and we didn't know if she'd pull through. After 2 weeks in the ICU, she came out of a coma and was moved to a recovery ward. While Caitlin was in recovery, she was not getting any better. We had a thorough meeting with the surgical team and came to the decision that to do, as a last resort, an exploratory surgery, The surgery team would have to go back in through the first cut on her stomach, but have to make it a wee bit bigger. They removed her intestines and took out her organs to see if they could find and hopefully fix the problem. After hours of surgery, Caitlin's surgery team came to us, told us Caitlin had ruptured stomach and parts of her large intestines were dead. They sewed her stomach back up, removed 2 foot of her large intestine, cleaned her intestines and stitched Caitlin's stomach back together for the second time. Soon after Caitlin's recovery was amazing. She was a completely different girl, and we knew it. At this stage, we knew she would pull through. Caitlin now, with her bowel a lot shorter than normal, needs access to a toilet quicker, as she's unable to hold herself like any other normal child would. With her having Landau-Kleffner syndrome, Caitlin would have trouble expressing this, and an SNA would help her if she got into difficulty. Adding all that, after all that Caitlin had gone through with her twisted bowel and having Landau-Kleffner syndrome, she would benefit massively from having an SNA to her while she's in school. It's been over 2 years on, and Caitlin's paediatric consultant's recommendations have not changed. She is still at risk. There are red flags to look out for with her bowel issue. We have been warned that she may need to be rushed to Temple Street Hospital again if any of these flags arise. It is worrying to us that if Caitlin was in the bathroom and ran into difficulties, that there is no one there to check on her since her SNA support was taken from her. It is also worrying that she is at risk of having a seizure at any time and she doesn't have an SNA by her side. Caitlin is a fighter and a very positive little girl, even after all she's been through. We don't want her to regress medically or mentally, and we are afraid that this will happen without the support of an SNA. Thank you very much for listening.
Good evening, everyone. I just want to commend everybody who's spoken in advance of me taking the stage, and to acknowledge how difficult it must have been for them to come up and speak, but I think it's extremely important that we hear those stories, and they represent schools right across the county, not only in Tullydonnell. I'm aware that the issue tonight is rooted in Tullydonnell, but I'm here, I suppose, to pose a few questions from a second level context when we move forward. I want to thank Anne-Marie for all the work that she does and for her support for us in St. Joseph's. We introduced our first AS class 3 years ago. I'm joined tonight by Walter Crummy. He won't thank me for pointing him out here, but I have to. He's sitting down here in the middle. Walter, raise your hand there so we can see you. And Walter approached me. Walter's background is in additional education needs. We're in Edmund Rice School in the heart of Drogheda, currently with a population of 850 boys, and we were aware of the lack of resources moving on from primary school in secondary schools in the South Louth area. So Walter approached me when I was appointed as principal and asked me if I would consider an application for an AS class. It was supported by the Edmund Rice Trust, and we opened our first class the following year under the guidance of Walter. We had 6 students straight away join us. At the end of that year, Walter came back because of the demand that there was in the area and asked if the Board of Management would consider opening a second class. So we have a second class currently opened, and we're at capacity there as well. I think there's an underriding message right across the board, and if we can think for a moment outside of our own contexts, what's very evident, listening to everybody here tonight, is the need for the inclusion model, and we all accept that. But we can't have that in word alone. We have to have the resources to support that model. And any school that is dealing with an autistic area needs additional supports. The model in secondary school, for example, is that we get 1.5 teachers and 2 SNAs allocated to each class of 6 students. And while the students are in the AS setting, as part of the inclusion model, we try to include the students in mainstream as often as we can. That creates a problem for us. And it's similar to the problem that is created here. We have some students who are not able to access mainstream and will not be able to access mainstream for a large amount of classes. But the aim for us is that we try and get as many of the 6 students to access as much as mainstream as is possible. In order to do that, they have to have the assistance of an SNA. So I have one student in 3rd year currently who is accessing 80% mainstream, but he requires an SNA to be with him the whole time. And that SNA is one of the 2 SNAs that is allocated to our AS1 class, which is currently in 3rd year. So that means that the remaining 5 students, when they're in the AS class, have the teacher and 1 SNA. So again, we have an issue there. You can see that it's comparable to what we're dealing with here. In order for that student to access inclusion, we have to try and balance 1 SNA with 5 other students. So it creates a problem right across, not only in primary schools, but when we get up to secondary school as well. And as I listen to the stories, you know, I don't want that everything that we're talking about tonight is negative. The positivity that has come to our school environment since we introduced the AS classes is unbelievable. And that is right across the full school community. I don't think there's one member of the school community in St. Joseph's that would challenge me on that. What the students have brought to us is far more than we can ever give to them. It has challenged the way we think. It has benefited other students who are in mainstream who may not have an AS diagnosis, but who are certainly on a spectrum. It has caused us to think of innovative ways in our teaching that are more accessible to all of the students who are in our care. But the same problem is there, the lack of resource when we're looking to follow the inclusion model. Because of COVID, we're in a slightly more secure position in second level schools, and I'm not sure if Anne-Marie finds herself in the same position. Prior to opening our AS class, we had 3 SNAs, and I got a phone call in February about 4 years ago to say that the SNA was visiting the school, and I see some of my primary colleagues nodding their head, so it's obviously relevant in primary as well. That they were going to evaluate the SNA allocation. So an SNA who had been with us for 3 years and has had a massive impact on students in the mainstream was told in the middle of February that her contract was being terminated because they didn't deem that the school needed the 3 SNAs that we had. And we then had to restructure. Now, there's if you like, a moratorium on that at the moment because of COVID. But as part of this conversation, there needs to be a bigger conversation in terms of how SNAs are allocated to primary schools and in terms of the allocation of SNAs in second level. And we need to look at the allocation of SNAs moving into the area beyond second level. I mentioned to you that our AS1 class is currently in 3rd year. We have 2 students in 2nd year and 4 in 1st year. So for the first time now as a school, we have to look at developing a programme in transition year to consider the future of our students as they move into 5th and 6th year. But we're starting to ask the question, where are the resources and the supports for the students when they come to the end of that? And it's too late for us to be looking at that in 6th year. So there's a much bigger question that we need to start asking here tonight. There's a need for joined up thinking where students that are moving through the system from primary school are identified and that there's provision put in place for them that's appropriate for them. We would often get a student who looks for a place in our school, and the conversation with the parents starts with an acknowledgement that their son needs a place in a special setting, but that the psychological report states a special setting, if this is not available, a setting in an AS school. You can imagine the challenges that presents, not only to us in terms of trying to manage the resources, but every aspect of school life and the challenges that presents to parents who find themselves at that stage looking for a place in a special school that doesn't exist. I don't want to represent other schools in the Drogheda area, but a lot of you will be aware of a special school that had a massive cut in its SNA allocation last year. So there's a much bigger problem, a much bigger issue that needs to be addressed. And my own experience, we have 7 SNAs in our school. The difference that they make to the lives of the students that they work with is phenomenal. And we shouldn't be compromised in that. And listening to the stories here tonight, one student shouldn't feel compromised because another student is deemed to need an SNA. There needs to be an increase. You'll be told that there has been an increase, that there's an additional 1,000 SNAs have been put into the system recently. That's like a drop in the water. That really has no major impact. It certainly hasn't impacted on us as a second level school, and we haven't got additional SNA allocation as a result of it. We have 3 SNAs allocated to mainstream and 2 to each of the AS classes. Look, that's it. So again, to summarise 2 points, we need to think of the continuum beyond primary school. I would love to see some joined up thinking with all the different agencies where we can put sufficient provision in place for students, not only at early intervention, but that there's a plan in place for each student as they move through the system, and that we don't find all of a sudden when you're faced in 6th class with choosing an option that there isn't a place in a special school. We need to know and recognise that those students are coming through and put provision in place so that there is an appropriate placement for the student when they reach 6th class and as they're moving into first year. And beyond that, what happens when they finish in the second level setting, and what provisions are in place for them beyond that. So I'm delighted to be part of the conversation. Look forward to working with you and with Anne-Marie in the future, and thanks very much for inviting us here tonight.
Hi, good evening everyone. I've been told to take the stage. I'm kind of terrified I'm probably going to come off it at some stage, so if I do, I wasn't at the wine. My name is Damien Connolly. I'm a clinical psychologist. I've been working in the area of ASD and intellectual disability for about 20 years now. So I'm hoping to give you just a little bit of a clinical perspective on things. It may turn into a sort of a mini lecture on autism or ASD or ASC, so I'll try not kind of drone on for too long. There is a short video as well that I'd just like to show people too. So there is a PowerPoint here. Maybe if I do come off the stage, then I won't come off it later. So this is just hopefully a relatively short presentation on autism spectrum conditions. I've used the word conditions because that's kind of changed over the last few years in particular. Previously it would have been referred to more as autism spectrum disorder. It still tends to be referred to a lot like that, but I suppose people have thought that the whole term disorder is a very pejorative term, and there are quite a lot of people with autism that certainly don't feel that they have a particular disorder. So we're trying to kind of move away from that sort of perspective. What I want to just do is maybe give you a brief outline of what sort of ASC is, just a very brief history, some of the terminology that's been used in the past, just to look at some of the current concerns, maybe some kind of red flags in terms of diagnosis, some of the areas of difficulty that people with ASD face, maybe some brief myths around it and just how we go about a diagnosis. But I suppose primarily because we're all here to look at the education piece, I would like to focus more on the education options. So I might just scroll through a few of these kind of slides quite quickly. When we started off sort of looking at autism years ago, it was a lot rarer, the diagnosis, than it was now. People sort of spoke of different things like neurobehavioural difficulties, neurobehavioural conditions, neurodevelopmental conditions. And I suppose when we started studying those, there tends to be a lot of jargon and a lot of jargon speaking that. When we looked at those initially, I suppose you're kind of thinking, I don't really understand these terms of what the hell it is or what the hell it means. So I thought what I'd do is I'd maybe just pop up a brief little video, and hopefully maybe it'll give you a slightly more functional understanding of kind of maybe what ASD is. Some of you may have seen this video before.
We are all different, and that's wonderful. Some differences are easy to see. Height, hairstyle, eye color, and so on. Other differences can't be seen. Our favorite foods, fears, or special skills. Interestingly, the way we see the world is also different. For instance, what do you see in this drawing? Most people see a duck, but some of you might have seen a rabbit. Whichever you saw, you are correct. This is just a trick drawing to show you that all brains work differently. The brain is your body's computer. It works differently for all of us and controls how you learn, That's why we are all good at different things. How you feel, which is why we all feel different emotions. And how you communicate. Sometimes the brain is connected in such a way it affects the senses and how we perceive and read situations and interactions. This is known as autism. Many people have autism, so it's likely you already know someone who is autistic. And for this reason, it's useful to know a little bit about autism. The special wiring inside an autistic brain can sometimes make the person good at tasks we may find difficult, such as mathematics, drawing, or music. It can also do the opposite, and activities we find too easy are incredibly difficult to them, such as making friends. The senses constantly send information to your brain about your surroundings and other people. However, when a person's brain and its senses don't communicate well, the brain can become overwhelmed and confused, affecting how they see the world. Picture yourself walking down the street. This is how an autistic brain may experience the same walk. Scary, isn't it? Sadly, in many cases, the person can't say out loud how they feel. So even though there's chaos going on in their heads, they seem okay on the outside, unable to ask for help. We all develop behaviors to help us feel calm in uncomfortable situations. We may look away, hug ourselves, chew our fingernails, fidget, bite our lips, and so on. Equally, autistic people develop behaviors that help them cope with these intense moments. These actions may seem unusual, but they're just their way to feel calm. When they happen, it means they are having a hard time. The kind thing to do is not to give them an even harder time by getting cross, ignoring them, or mocking them. Remember, just because a PlayStation can't read an Xbox game, it doesn't mean it's broken. People with autism need friends who are willing to take the time to know them. With good communication and plenty of patience, everyone would be better off. People with autism are not ill or broken. They simply have a unique view of the world. And with a little support from their friends, they might just be able to share that view with us. Autism can make amazing things happen.
But I'll just give you a little bit in terms of terminology. So I think people had mentioned the DSM-5 book. Basically, DSM-5 is kind of like a US version of sort of different checklists for what people call or term different disorders. So everything from kind of anxiety to autism to schizophrenia. And it gives you a kind of a rundown of the checklist and the things you should expect and the criteria for a diagnosis. ICD-10 is sometimes also mentioned, and that's a similar book to DSM, and ICD-10 can probably be seen as the European version of DSM. Prior to 2013, all these things were called pervasive developmental disorders, and ASD was part of that, and also Rett's disorder, or a thing called childhood disintegrative syndrome. In 2013, DSM-5 changed the terminology, and they just came up with the whole thing of autism spectrum disorders, so they got rid of terms like Asperger's syndrome and autistic disorder, PDD-NOS. Just again, a little bit of background. So we mentioned it's a neurodevelopmental condition. The diagnosis of autism is behavioural, with exception of things, Fragile X, where there is an actual genetic condition. The diagnosis of autism is behavioural, so that means we have to go in and observe different behavioural symptoms. We take notice they occur, and if they fit in with the DSM definition, then after a number of different assessments, we can come to a conclusion that what we're seeing is probably most likely an ASC. It's commonly stated that about 75% of kids with a diagnosis of ASD also have an intellectual disability. That research is probably outdated, and it's probably closer to about 50%. The research tends to indicate that autism can be reliably diagnosed by at least 2 years of age, and in some cases earlier. but unfortunately that tends not to happen. There is a male to female ratio of about 3 or 4 to 1, and I think it had been mentioned earlier, one of the parents here had mentioned that there is a lot of masking in terms of females, so there's quite a possibility that that ratio may actually be incorrect. We're looking in terms of how common ASC is. Currently, depending on what you read, it's maybe everything from every 1 in 100 people to 1 in 75 to 1 in 68, and we've seen figures from the United States as low as 1 in 36. Roughly, if you look at the 1970s research, you were looking at maybe kind of 4 or 5 people in every 10,000. So you can see there's been a massive jump. If we kind of look at those stats in terms of roughly 1.5% of the population, then in Ireland we'd expect that roughly between 50 to 75,000 people in Ireland have ASD. I could be here all night sort of talking about has there been an increase in diagnosis. The short answer is yes. In terms of explaining why is, I suppose, a much different scenario. I suppose just in terms of the current concerns, briefly to mention, despite our advances and kind of all the research that's gone into ASC, including sort of a decrease in the age of detection, the average age of a diagnosis is still around 4 years of age, and it's been stubbornly around that probably for the last 10 years or so. Again, the average age of diagnosis in Ireland is around about 4 years, and again, for people who would have previously been diagnosed with conditions like Asperger's or high-functioning autism, the average age of diagnosis for them is about 6 or 7 years of age. Just to mention, I suppose the whole point of being here is that early diagnosis and intervention is critical to improving long-term function of children with ASD. More positive outcomes are generally noted, and the most positive outcomes are generally noted when children start an early intervention at less than 30 months of age. The difficulty then obviously with that is people are not being diagnosed at that age, so we're missing out on kind of crucial treatments. Part of the reason for that is that there are lengthy wait lists for AON diagnostic assessments. The wait lists are almost certainly just going to increase as prevalence rates go up and resource availability goes down. And also, I suppose, the current ASD diagnostic assessments are very time consuming and they're going to remain so. I suppose some of you may be familiar with that the HSE have introduced new procedures in terms of diagnosis called the preliminary team assessment. So the whole point of that now, what tends to happen is it just seems to be, I hate to be cynical about it, but it seems to be a cynical effort to kind of move people along from one waiting list onto another so that there is no kind of legal recourse to sue people. So in terms of education options, if you do get a diagnosis of ASC, whether it's through a private route or through the HSE, the options that are available are kind of a number of the ones that are there. So one, you have a mainstream preschool without any kind of particular supports. That's probably more unusual, but it still happens. You can have a mainstream preschool, what they call AIM supports. Previously would have been called special needs assistants within preschools. You can apply from home tuition, which can be a one-to-one home tutor in your home, and that can be from the age of 2.5 to 3 years. You get 10 hours home tuition. Over 3 years, you get 20 hours home tuition. You can also apply for an ASD early intervention class from the age of 3 years. You can also apply for just what they call an ASD class, which is a school-going age with supports, and again, they may have kind of, they will also have SNA and resource. You can also apply then, for ASD classes of schools without supports. Sorry, there should be ASD mainstream classes without supports, and then there are ASD secondary school classes, and then at third level, you're probably looking at sort of disability access routes to education, or called DARE. Just to look at maybe sort of what had happened previously. So in terms of the first kind of ASC early intervention class was set up in Wexford, and Schull were a national school in Kilcots, and that was what was called an ABA, or an applied behaviour analysis class. Parents fought extremely hard at the time to get that class set up, and I think there was an additional 11 classes that were set up along with that. The department agreed to fund that model of education at the time, and that model education then became particularly expensive, and then there was huge legal battles kind of drawn out over the years about kind of whether ABA would be the best approach for teaching kids. Since then, at least positively, there have been numerous kind of ASC classes set up around Ireland, and as most of you will be familiar, the structure is that there are 6 children maximum in the class, 1 teacher and 2 special needs assistants or SNAs. Sure.
So yes, there's all these teachers doing these ASD classes, but these teachers are coming out with teaching degrees, are they learning how to treat autistic kids? Is there some university that teaches them?
No.
I know the answer.
I know, I'm actually going to talk about that in a little bit, no, but it's an extremely good point. But just to continue, just to say in terms of sort of, there's maybe just a little bit in defence of kind of what the department are doing in the NCSE, because I suppose we're not here to sort of bash the department completely. There are currently, I think as it was mentioned before, the plan to have up to 18,000 SNAs in school by at least the end of this year. While that's very positive, obviously there's been a huge increase in 2011, there was just over 10,000 SNAs. But I know already it has been said that many people feel even with the increase in SNAs, it's really a drop in the ocean and people haven't felt the impact of that in their school. What the plan is to have what they call a school inclusion module. And the school inclusion module, what they're going to do is the plan for that is to provide kind of in-house or in-school therapeutic supports. That will be things like speech and language therapy and OT. So the aim of that is to have those things on site that they'll promote better outcomes for children, and the people that, you know, the professionals they need to see will be there and will be easily accessible. The difficulty with that, I suppose, is that they've had piloted that in one what they call community healthcare sort of area, which is CHO7, which is around, I think, West Dublin and Kildare. They have run a pilot project and it has been kind of quite successful, but the rollout of that has been incredibly slow and it's been impacted significantly by COVID. The plan is to have these things in place, but again, the pace of everything just seems to be extremely slow and extremely kind of glacial. So it was also, there's a thing just to mention in terms of ASD and early intervention classes. So there's a number of things that the department had noted that where there were circumstances where things had changed during the course of the 21-22 school year, where they said there was a material increase in the level of care needed to a school to the extent that the school could clearly demonstrate it couldn't be met within their initial resources, that the school could apply to the NCSE or the National Council of Special Education for a review. And I suppose that's really where the crux of the difficulties have started to kind of crop up. I suppose some of the main concerns in terms of with the Department of Education and the NCSE is there really has been a significant lack of communication between the department, between the NCSE and the schools. I think one thing that's probably even reflective of that, I just looked up a few kind of parliamentary questions in relation to this. There had been a parliamentary question, I think, in relation to what they call SNA exceptional reviews that Anne-Marie had mentioned. One of the parliamentary questions went into the Department of Education, and what they'd said was that they had given out figures of 1,488 SNA exceptional review applications being made. The same question went into the NCSE, and their figures for the exact same year was that there was a total of 647 special needs applications. So it was quite clear to see that kind of one hand doesn't really know what the other hand's doing, which is extremely disappointing. The others then, I think, and as you just mentioned, is there is a significant problem in terms of the lack of standardization of training for teachers within ASD classes. And this isn't to have a go at any teachers of that, but I suppose if you call an electrician out to your house, you want to know if you call one out, and I'm not having a go at electricians either, but if you call one electrician out, you need to know that they have the same training, the same level of training as if you call 10 different electricians out. If you go into an ASD class, my experience over the last 20 years has been you may have, and you may be very lucky to have committed people like Anne-Marie and her staff. We've met various people like that around the country. Equally, you may have people that have very limited training and they don't maybe go out and go the extra mile to source that. Plus also that training, when they do go the extra mile, is usually funded by themselves and usually done on kind of summer or days and holidays when they're off. The other difficulty then is the whole idea of this front-loaded special needs assistance allocation system. So the idea with all that is that it would remove, say, either people like me from the system or other people where a parent would need to go and get a diagnosis kind of privately, that all those things would be removed and it would be done on the basis of a child's need. So that need could be determined within the school. Unfortunately, the difficulty is really, it's impossible to know how these things are done in terms of what constitutes a child's additional needs and kind of what the criteria are going to be for that. At the minute, that seems to be just very, very woolly. And again, the communication between department, NCSE and the school seems to be poor. There's also seems to be a lack of kind of clarity in terms of kind of how the appeals process for that will work. And again, we're just looking at the whole system again being extremely woolly. And although they are kind of saying they will provide these therapies within the new inclusion model, again, the pace of that is very slow, and exactly how they will be provided or what the allocation for kids in school just really hasn't been determined. There has been another problem with there's a lack of standardization of training for SNAs. That seems to be changing. There is a proposal, I think, to have a kind of a standardized training that's going to be within UCD. I'm not sure if that's started yet because of COVID. I suppose the difficulty then just seems to be, and probably why everybody's kind of here, is that kids who manage to progress to mainstream, they seem to be penalised by losing, access to the very resources that got them there in the first place, and that's really a huge difficulty. So I suppose just in terms of kind of, I suppose what I really feel is needed in order to address these things, I mean, there needs to be a significant increase in communication between the departments, the NCSE and the schools. There was cross-departmental access promised, I think, for pretty much the last 20 years in terms of that this thing, that thing and the other would be done, and very, very little of it seems to have been done. It kind of seems to always be kicking the can down the road. There needs to be much more joined up thinking between the Department of Education, the NCSE and even central government. There needs to be an understanding, I suppose, of kids who have successfully made it into mainstream education, that they need to really be adequately supported rather than penalised. So the whole system really should be like kind of scaffolding or building up a house, and that you put your scaffolding in first, which is like the SNAs to support them. Once your house is built, you can gradually draw that scaffolding away, and the house, when it's well built, will stand. Unfortunately, at the minute, it seems to be there's no scaffolding being put in place, and it's just expected that children will kind of, grow or mature into these things on their own, which isn't going to happen. There's also a huge need for, I suppose, to understand the true needs of parents and even schools and their ability to plan for this. One of the things that we've been kind of screaming at the various departments for I'd say probably close to 20 years now, is that they develop an autism-specific database, and that would help them understand the numbers that, in each county, the numbers that are going into different schools. The database system that they have at the minute is very, very messy, and it's not clear. And if you don't have a good sort of database system, it's very, very hard to plan around it. The other bit, I suppose, that we've kind of significantly had a problem with is really understanding why kind of many professional recommendations, particularly in relation to kind of SNAs when they're being made for school, and when those recommendations are being made by psychologists, speech and language therapists, OT, those recommendations are made on the basis of extensive assessments, yet then we see that people can go into a school, do one simple review, and then say this child doesn't need an SNA. So I really don't understand how those opinions are being trumped by what's happening. And I suppose the final thing we need, there is a huge amount of evidence to say that early intervention is really, really important and it's really, really successful. But I suppose the quality of that evidence isn't as high as it should be. So much more kind of quality research needs to be done. And I suppose that's always been one of the difficulties with, even when people were fighting in the courts about whether ABA was a good system or not. Because there wasn't enough quality kind of research done to back it, the department were able to argue on another side, well, it could be this, it could be that. And when you give people that leeway without the quality research and the evidence to back it up, you give them wriggle room, I suppose, to get out of it. So one of the things that could be done, whether it's through different schools, I mean, there could certainly be small-scale research projects to look at differences in kind of how SNAs make an impact, the difference without having SNAs, and people should maybe consider putting in place some of those things. They're just a couple of thoughts, really. Again, I'm happy to take any questions at the end. I suppose just before I finish, I would like to commend all the parents that spoke. Sadly, it's kind of been an ongoing fight that I see for parents in the 20 years that I've worked in ASD, and it really hasn't changed that much. I don't want to be overly negative because there are a lot of positives there between the kids, obviously, that you support, but the people like Anne-Marie and her staff who really help and support all the kids in school. So I suppose if we can maybe get a conversation going and get the ball rolling, but I suppose if we can be more positive and proactive rather than negative. So thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Damien. Thank you. If I can ask, can I just ask my two little friends here, do you want to come up and say a few little words? Because I know it's getting late. You're getting tired. Do you want to come up here on the stage?
My name is Eli, and this is my sister Molly May, and we're autistic. And I wanted to read you something. So could I do that, Mrs. Hort? It's about 10 strengths that people with autism add to society. Always unique, totally interesting, sometimes mysterious. 1. They have sensory sensitivities. Their hypersensitivity almost certainly still enables them to sense certain dangers before everyone else. 2. They are independently minded. People with autism are not people pleasers. They say what they think and they stick to their principles and beliefs despite pressure from others. 3. They can be hyper-focused, careful and meticulous. When most people are slapdash and half-hearted, there is so much they have to contribute. 4. They are honest. They say it as it really is. No hype, no spin, no game playing. 5. They don't like noise and bustle and busyness. We could all benefit if we slowed down and made the world a quiet place. 6. They can concentrate on a single thing of interest for far longer than most. That can lead towards perfection and excellence. 7. They don't judge people. We could all learn to be kinder to others from their example. 8. They are passionate about things, and their passion can make things happen. 9. They don't give up easily. They keep going until something is finished. 10. They think differently. Put their thinking about things into the pot with everyone else's thoughts, and we will all see things from even more angles, which will enrich us all. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Eli and Molly May. Two wonderful children. I suppose just before I finish up and hand it out to the floor, I just suppose want to mention, just in relation to your question, Caroline, yes, there is no training. You open a class, bye-bye and the best of luck. I've contacted St. Patrick's and DCU, and I got a reply back from Dr. John White in relation to my concerns about the statistics, as Damien has pointed out, the increase in statistics. We have a lot of children who are on the spectrum, and these children need to be managed carefully and with skill and with knowledge, or otherwise damage will be done. I suppose to finish up, where are we going from here? The statistics are on the increase. We are going to have more and more children who need care. And we need the government to listen. There's an NCSE model in place. There is policy in place for integration and inclusion. But as Damien said, there's no joined up thinking. There's no joined up thinking. There was nothing financial to gain by not giving an SNA to the two boys who transitioned in. We also had a number of other cases, a significant number of cases in the school of children who were diagnosed up in mainstream. They were not acknowledged either. So I had 8 cases on top of my normal allocation. Extra. I would call that an exception. I would call that a need for an exceptional review. I got nothing. I applied for 2 SNAs, I got nothing. We can't integrate successfully, and we can't help these children if we don't have the support to do it. Otherwise, it's lip service and it's optics and it's paperwork. And we need to see the words put into action. I suppose where we're going from here is we're looking for training for teachers. We're looking for joined up thinking. We're looking for a review of the way the system is working, a review of the way the system is working so that people have options and that children have the potential to do great things and to be the best that they can be. And that's all we want for all our children. When you're handed a baby in the hospital and your baby's handed over to you, you have all these wonderful dreams. When your child doesn't meet their milestones, or something along the way, you're saying something's just not right here. That's a story that needs to be told. And there are ears that need to listen. The statistics, we're being judged on a profile. Tullydonnell, rural school, they have how many pupils? 1.8 SNAs, that'll do them fine. They're fine, they have enough there. Well, I'm sorry, we have all our little handprints of our children in our school. All our handprints, all the little, my dad once said, you want to look at a child, you look down at their little hand, and you see how small that little hand is, and all the work that has to be done. Each child is a little individual with a whole life ahead of them with so much to offer the world. And it's our job to fight for them. It's our job to fight for them. And this is only the start of a conversation. I don't know about the rest of you, but I'm not letting this one lie. I'm going to hand it out to the floor now. Michelle.
Thanks, Anne-Marie. Wow, everybody, it was really emotional. I'm Councillor Michelle Hall, but I'm not really here as a councillor. I was an SNA for 13, 14 years. I'm now a learning support teacher in a DEIS school in Drogheda. People used to say, oh my God, your job must be so difficult, must be so hard. Oh my God, my job was the best job in the world. It really was. I mean, to go into work every day and get to spend time with children like Eli and Molly May, it was just a privilege, so it was. So I've worked in special schools, I've worked in mainstream, I've worked in special classes. So I have a kind of unique perspective as being a special needs assistant, and then gone on to do my teacher training as well. So my research, and that's why I'm kind of just mentioning it here today, my dissertation research, which I just got a special recommendation on the Higher Education Awards, was around play and autism. Now, play and autism for children under 7 years of age. Play at that age is teaching and learning, so it is. So because I was an SNA, my perspective was kind of like, who spends the most time with the children? Where do they spend the most time playing? And how do we support them best? And the outcomes from my research was the SNAs. The SNAs spend the most time with the children, whether that's a mainstream, special class, or a special school. They support the children the best because they have more time to spend either outside, inside, whether it's in the toilet, helping to their care needs, at the lunch table, whatever it is, the SNA is so crucial, and building up that relationship really helps them progress. The teachers that I interviewed, so I was interviewing teachers, I wasn't interviewing SNAs, I was interviewing teachers, and they were saying I wouldn't just be able to do anything without our SNAs. I spend time, the teachers were saying, I spend time one-on-one with children, so the SNAs are spending all that extra time supporting the children. They model the play, they keep the children safe during their play. One of the aspects that came out of it was the inspectorate. So principals here probably won't really want to hear this, like, oh my God, more inspectors. But actually, people don't realise in primary education, there's very little outdoor inspectors coming in, very little. And very little of it examining play, examining autism, and provision of outdoor play spaces. So my findings also found that children in mainstream education actually found it most stressful going outdoor to play with the sensory overload when you go out into mainstream yard. The provision for play in mainstream is very, very poor compared to, say, special school or special class, where they may have a playground, etc. For example, like I think since 2017, so obviously pre-COVID and everything, I can't off my head, I think maybe about 3 or 4 schools were inspected in Louth under special provision, special education provision. Now that is very little. I mean, if we can't look at the quality of our educational provision, and obviously if there's outside people coming into our school, we are going to raise our levels so much higher, aren't we? I mean, I've worked in residential social care as well. You're constantly having inspectorates. Early childhood education, twice a year, they're getting Tulsa, they're getting Pobble to come in. I know it seems like a lot of paperwork, but it just means that we'll have provision of education that will be so much higher. But the SNAs are crucial. They're absolutely crucial for that. When I started as an SNA in one of the mainstream schools, there were 4 SNAs, and we used to have a chat in the corridor. Those days are long gone. There's no such thing as a chat in the corridor, because at one stage I had 6 children that I was looking after during the day. I was in senior infants with 3 children with really high needs. I was caring for a child with diabetes in another classroom, and then in the afternoon going up to 6th class. So you're spreading yourself out so much that building up that relationships, we're kind of getting diluted a little bit more as well. We really need to go back to the model where, we have more SNAs and we're supporting the children as much as we can. So whatever we can do. One of the other things I did find as well, and a lot of the teachers commented on, was even in a special class, that it's still too high, 6 children in that class. You will get so much more done if you had 4 children in that class, because if you bring children into the mainstream, which you want to do, that's the thing, transition them into mainstream, maybe not in junior infants, but throughout their years. But then you're left with children back in the other classroom with 1 SNA trying to maybe deal with 4 children while the teacher is dealing with 1 child, and she's teaching them. There's so many stories I could say over the years that the problems, and Anne-Marie knows it, but yeah, we could definitely do a lot better, and I really hope that my own research, I want to go further with that and examine how we support children in under 7 years of age. Thanks.
Molly May, did you want your mum to ask a few questions? Yeah? Oh, you haven't got the questions. Yeah, I'll have a look. Can I just check and see if there's anybody else who'd like to ask anything or put it to the floor?
You can come with the mic, don't be shy. Have we got anybody?
I have a question.
Go ahead.
After this, what's the next step to push this on? Like, is it going to fall on deaf ears somewhere, or what's our next step as a community to push this on and drive it?
That's a great question, and there is an answer insofar as we've been very lucky so far. We've public representatives here in Michelle, Jed, myself. There's been public representatives that have already put questions to the Minister of Education, Minister for Children and Equality. So this is the beginning, and I wholeheartedly believe and agree with Anne-Marie, this is the start of a journey. But the most important thing is that we all collectively stick together with this, because my impression is, like, as a mum, you'll do anything for your child. There's no doubt about it. You dig deeper and deeper every time if there's a challenge. But these parents are extraordinary. Now, saying that, Eli's just smashed it tonight. He put you all to shame, no matter how good you were. But we dig deep. But these parents, I'm getting a feeling, and I could well be wrong about this, but they've been fighting individually. Individually, and if they hadn't had the support of teachers like Anne-Marie and her staff, what would they have done? I like talking to you, Emmett. You were talking about how many times did you have to fill out a form and it came back because an I wasn't dotted or a T wasn't crossed. It shouldn't be that hard, but one voice is only a voice. It's only a drop in the ocean. It needs to continue to be voices. So from here, it's the beginning of the conversation. We will come back to it again and again and again, and we will engage, and I'm hoping that we will get the support, and I know we will, be it Jed Nash, Fergus O'Dowd, the whole bloody lot of them. We are going to continue to engage, and we are going to continue this conversation. Like, yes, we got extra SNAs, but everybody has repeatedly said it's a drop in the ocean. These children can't be denied. They're wonderful. Like, they see the world in a completely different view from us. And I think, Anne-Marie, you put it beautifully. Sometimes people look at them strangely, but they equally look back at you and say, how weird are you? So we have to remember that. Like, they have so much to offer. And as Paul had said, they've had to think differently. They've had to think innovatively. So these wonderful children have challenged teachers to do more, to think more, and to offer more, not just to them, but to the school as a whole. So we really owe it to them, and we owe it to ourselves as well, to continue this conversation, to continue this journey, and do it. Write about it. Put it up on your social media. Don't let it be today's story and then forgotten about. Let's keep it going.
And I think the one thing that really strikes me with the whole thing is that we just need to stick together, guys. We all need to stick together on this one, because there's a bit of divisiveness going on, divide and conquer. Oh, and the principals there will tell you, oh, the principal has been allocated the SNAs, it's up to the principal how she allocates them. That's the line you'll get. But the principal hasn't been allocated enough resources, and that's where we run into trouble. So we need to come together to fight the battle. Because at the end of the day, what kind of a society do we have? Nice to have infrastructure, nice to have the lovely motorways, but if we can't take care of the vulnerable, the old people, the children with additional needs, what kind of a civilised society do we call that? And on that now I'm going to pass it over to Molly May. Now Molly May, I'm going to ask you just a couple of questions. How do you feel when you can't explain things?
Annoyed.
Okay. How do you feel when you can't understand?
Annoyed again.
How long does it take to understand things that you don't understand? These are Molly May's questions she wanted me to ask.
Quite a while.
And does that bother you?
Yes.
Do you get frustrated?
Yes.
And then how do you feel?
Angry.
Angry. And does that happen when you're in class sometimes?
Sometimes.
And do you keep that then to yourself, or do you wait till you go home?
I wait till I go home.
And then what happens?
I tell Mummy.
And you get a bit upset?
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's tough, isn't it? Isn't she a great girl? Can we have a big bool of us for these two great children? Thank you, Molly May. Over to Jen.
Thanks very much, Anne-Marie. Why the hell did I have to follow Molly May? And Eli, I mean, I was really struck by Eli's brilliant, courageous remarks earlier on. And frankly, I worry for my job as a TD. And I took a little note of what you said, Eli. What you said was, no hype, no spin, you tell the truth. We need politicians like you. We need people like you running the country. I'd certainly vote for Eli and for Molly May if they were running for election. The point was asked earlier on by your good self about where we go from here. The first step has already been taken. Anne-Marie contacted me a few short weeks ago to describe to me the battle that she was in and the response from the Department of Education and the CNO and the NCSE. And I was absolutely stunned. I know Anne-Marie, I know the work that you and your staff do, and I know that you and this community and every family that depends on Tully Donald School needs to be supported. And that was the first step. I'm here with you. Many of you don't have a voice, and I don't intend to speak too long tonight. I have a platform. I have a voice. It's called Dáil Éireann. You don't have a voice. You don't have a platform. Molly May, Eli and Shay don't have a platform, but I want to be your voice. So does Michelle, so does Paula. And often, children with behavioural needs and their families are alone, and they feel alone. Society and the way it's operated over the last few decades means that you are alone, and you're constantly battling for things that you should be able to access as of right. It's a constant battle. Helen, you said it earlier on, a battle for an assessment and a diagnosis. A battle then when you go to primary school for resources that should be allocated as of right. Paul said it earlier on, the battle to make sure that the transition from primary school to secondary school works. And then what happens after secondary school? That's another battle as well. Now the reason why I went into public life and asked you and the people of Louth and Eastmeath for a vote a number of years ago was because I believe in an equal society. And I believe that everybody should be enabled to be the best they possibly can be in this republic. And we live in an unequal society, but we live in a rich society. and a very, very wealthy society. But our society can only become truly rich and truly wealthy if we enable everybody to be the best they can be. Now, it does not make sense to me, knowing that what we know, that early intervention, early diagnosis and early intervention works, that those resources would be pulled away when you move into mainstream. It is official policy, and has been for many, many years now, that children would be encouraged to go to mainstream. It is official policy that there should be inclusion, but it does not make sense from a policy, educational or financial or economic perspective to pull those resources away. Now, we are on a journey. You said it earlier on, Emmett, and you spoke exceptionally well with great passion for your son. We are on a journey, but Shay's journey and Eli's journey and Molly May's journey is going to be that bit more difficult. It should not be that way. I'm with you. We've taken the first step. I'm with you on that journey. Michelle and I, Paula, and other public representatives across this county will help you. And I'm here not just because of Tully Donald School and the families affected, but because this illustrates a much broader point. Things have to change, and they have to change from here. Thank you.
I'm just aware it's getting very late.
Yeah. I was just going to say, have we any takers? I'll start doing bingo calls. No? Okay, listen, everybody, thank you so much for coming. And the last word, Anne-Marie.
Yeah, thanks everybody for coming. Just this is just the start of the story. You'll be hearing more. We'll be upping the ante, and we'll be going to Dublin if we need to do. And I mean that.